Cool. So we are live. Thanks for joining me, Craig. We're back with another episode. It's going to be interesting. We're going to talk all things kind of strength training, rehab, physiotherapy, that kind of space today with Craig. So first off, what would be great is if you could just give us a brief kind of intro of who you are, like how you got into the industry, what your journey's been like so far.
Yeah, sweet. So my name's Craig. Thanks for the introduction. I own Injury Active Clinic. So it's a sports injury clinic. We're based along the M11 from Cambridge all the way down into Bishop Stortford. So we have 4 clinics. I guess I could start with, at university, I ended up doing sports therapy. So that was the degree that I chose to do, like a 3-year kind of musculoskeletal degree. Really enjoyed it. I just knew that I wanted to stay within the sporting environment. So this kind of degree was perfect for me. And in the 3rd year, we had to do some work experience, and I ended up working at a football club. And quite quickly, I realized that working in a football club wasn't really for me. It was just, I don't know, it just felt like it was a bit of a dog-eat-dog world, and whoever could stab each other in the back was the one that kind of like pushed through further. So soon after that, I ended up running a clinic for someone in Newmarket, actually. And I just had a lot of fun, and you got to see so many variations in injuries and stuff. So that definitely appealed to me way more. And after this, I ended up going to Australia, and this is where I kind of found CrossFit. I started training at CrossFit Sydney, and I just felt like there was a big old kind of area there that I wanted to tap into, dealing with people that like really enjoyed their training, because being exposed to CrossFit, it made me realize that people really wanted to kind of go after this type of sport. So when I ended up coming back from Australia, I came back to Cambridge, and 2 months previous to this, CrossFit Cambridgeshire had just opened up. So I decided to start training there, and just getting involved in their classes. A few of my old clients got in touch with me, and I ended up just working upstairs in their office. And I was dealing with like their members, old clients, and just being introduced to way more shoulders than I'd ever obviously seen before. And shoulders at university was definitely one of those things that we just didn't really like, shoulders and wrist. But literally had about a year, maybe 10 months with them at that place. And then we quickly moved on to a different location, much bigger location. A year after that, I opened up my own CrossFit gym. It was called Lift Off CrossFit at the time. And then I subsequently kind of opened up new clinics over the next 4 or 5 years. So in total, 4 clinics, like I said. And I've kind of just like since 2013, just, been working in this environment where I'm dealing with recreational athletes. So like people like you and I that love to train, but also have a bit of either career or studying and stuff. So it's a exercise to you and I, and to most people, is a huge vice that we use to kind of like de-stress, to kind of improve our health. And it's just as important as compared to someone that's like professionally doing it. So it's something that I really enjoy. And yeah, and I guess over the years, I've just found my way, and that's obviously like the way that I've tried to direct Injury Active in terms of its treatment methods.
No, that's awesome. Thanks for sort of giving us that kind of rundown of kind of your journey, I suppose, so far, from university to now. Like, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because having that perspective from both the, I don't know what you call it, kind of private sector. So what
Yeah.
you're doing now versus the kind of more sports team, it's a bit easier distinction somewhere like America, where it's kind of collegiate or private, but in the UK, it's probably not quite as clear
Yeah.
cut, but there is still that working with a sports team, athletes versus working in a private sector.
Yeah.
It's interesting, I think, to get both of those perspectives, because as you say, like the kind of the professional sport arena is a very much a dog eat dog. It's very competitive, and I think it's for probably someone like yourself and kind of in the path you've taken, it's a little bit restrictive probably, because you're kind of, you have to fit within the structure of a team and how they operate, versus,
Yeah.
as you said, being able to
And
do your own thing almost.
absolutely. And not just that, I quickly realized, which I wasn't taught at university, that, my degree is very limited. So obviously all sports teams are very much geared towards like the physiotherapy side of it. I chose not to do physio because it just wasn't for me. I realized that I just didn't want to go into hospitals. I didn't want to be dealing with neural patients, things like cystic fibrosis. It just wasn't for me. So I ended up doing sports therapy, but then when I got into football, it was only, it was outside of the football league. And I realized that you actually, to be pitch side in the football league, you had to be a physiotherapist. So I was like, oh, straight away as well, it wasn't going to work for me. So if I was going to stay in that industry, I wanted to go to the top. So yeah, I had to change my direction with that. And yeah, just coincidentally, I just enjoyed it so much more dealing with people that really want to help themselves as well. So
Yeah, in terms of like, so beyond university, obviously, as you say, like some of the degrees or some of the kind of study you can do can be quite restrictive,
yeah.
and it's kind of fairly limited, I think, in sort of the scope of practice that it allows you to operate within. Like, what are some of the so from since graduating and sort of up to this point, where are some of the educational routes you've sought out as a kind of a private practitioner, business owner within in the space?
Yeah, I guess early doors after graduating, it's just, you try and find these websites and these companies that offer different types of programs. And it's one of them where you're like, okay, well, that looks good. That takes my interest, or these are my weaknesses. So I want to get on, early on, I remember going on a taping course. I ended up going on just, especially the days that would involve different lecturers talking about different topics. Love those. So there were a few around at the time which I really enjoyed. And then I remember falling in on one where it kind of just tapped into just my way of thinking a little bit more. So I always wanted to know, why things happen. Why when we're running do we pick up an issue in one side versus the other when pretty much we're going through the same type of loading? What's happening there? And I found like in the end, I just randomly fell on this course, and it helped me kind of understand that maybe it's to do with a little bit more of our movement and our mechanics, and as well as the loading side of it. There's just another alternative to that. So then I ended up going on more of those courses, but it's really just off recommendations of what other people have said. And I guess like people that are out there that are quite popular online, and I want to see what they're saying. Like one of the guys at the moment that I'm dealing with or going on a history CPD course is a Greg Lehman, quite a famous guy in the therapy world, in the physio world. So I'm just on his course figuring out what he's teaching at the moment.
Counter to that, then, how do you feel like, so when you first went into the CrossFit gym, CrossFit Cambridgeshire, and were then operating out there as a physio or
Mm.
rehab sort of specialist, like how valuable do you think that experience was, being able to just get an influx of cases and people to be working with?
Yeah, and I mean that coincided with me opening my own gym made me a better coach, and I realized that the way I want to coach as well, because so much of it is to do with understanding people's management of their load and their training. So we know with tendon issues, the majority of tendon problems come from training error. So we need to really understand, the periodization side of things. We need to understand strength and conditioning. We need to understand why is their wrist hurting in the catch and the clean every single time? Well, we need to understand what's happening in that kind of whole movement. So that experience within the CrossFit world absolutely shaped the way I am as a therapist, because it gave me so much exposure, firstly to the different types of movements, got me really involved in the strength side of it, up to my training in that side of things as well. So I got to really experience like it personally. Um, and yeah, I got exposed to so many injuries, in particular, lower back, shoulders, wrists, knees, all that sort of stuff. And certainly a lot more overuse injuries. So, I've seen quite a lot of tendon problems over the years because of that.
Yeah, I think it's as you say, like I think this is something probably echoed within strength conditioning, like with coaches. I think you don't need necessarily first-hand experience within a sport, within a context, to be able to then treat or coach someone within that necessarily. But it's helpful, certainly, like having that understanding of the kind of the demand someone is coming in with. But then beyond just the physical side of it, the mental side of it as well, like understanding people, essentially, like understanding what drives someone. Because
Yeah,
obviously, from a pure physio point, you might be like, oh, okay, well, maybe just avoid doing this. And then
yeah,
it's like, well, you telling someone to avoid doing that. So like, oh, maybe just don't do this in the gym. It's like, well, I enjoy doing that in the gym, so I want to go and do that. And it's that kind of multifaceted approach that's beyond just the
couldn't
nuts
agree
and
more.
bolts of physical
Yeah.
skills.
100%. And obviously it's like runners, runners really want to run. So telling them to rest, it's almost just not going to happen. And it's the same in that CrossFit or that gym environment. People just really, really want to train. And I was one of those. So where I got to experience injuries myself, I knew that I wanted to train so much. I was like, you know what can I do to carry on training? And that's where I guess it helped shape the way that I treat as a therapist. when we learned at university, it was if we pick up an injury, it was kind of stay away from the aggravating injury, and then let's try and start off with some modalities or start with some treatment. But actually, it's just a small, after experiencing all of this myself and these injuries, you just need to try and make small tweaks. What can you carry on training that doesn't affect that? So for example, with shoulders going overhead, okay, well, let's avoid that, but we might get away with kind of horizontal pushing movements and certainly pulling motions. So I got to really experience that firsthand, and it took away the fear of, being able to keep people training, because I knew that it would work. I knew that in most cases, shoulder issues can carry on pulling, and that keeps people training, and it's obviously good for shoulder health as well.
Which is that's a kind of a refreshing change, I think, from what has always been the tradition, is just rest and avoid rather than ever getting back to actually where you were before. Because I mean, and this is something I've kind of talked about before, is that the idea of the point of rehab is not that you then keep doing that rehab forever, and it's not that you then just avoid certain things forever. It's a case of you actually want to get back to where you were previously, and
Yeah.
it should then be set up and guiding you towards that.
Yeah. Yeah. The closer we can keep you to your task, the less deconditioning you'll have, and also the less distance there is to try and make up for. Do you know what I mean? So let's say, for example, you're experiencing shoulder pain on the bench press. Well, what happens if we change the width of your grip? If we can get away with that in a pain-free manner, I'm going to keep you bench pressing. The intensity might be a bit lower, and you might be working at 50% of your kind of strength, but at least there we're carrying on being task specific, and you're still loading that shoulder in that same position. So it probably means we haven't got as far to come back from, versus completely resting for 6 weeks. Everything else is deconditioned. And then we've probably got to be really careful building that load up again, So it's another way to help avoid it for future injuries as well.
So I'm piggybacking on that kind of that idea. Like, I know this is obviously very context dependent, but what would you kind of see as some like the key guiding principles? Where do you start when you are initially assessing a new client, an injury, or anything in that capacity?
So I think that the biggest thing here is trying to make them feel comfortable. You have to build that trust. It's the first date. You have to be able to extract as much information out of them as possible, because they're going to tell you the answers. They're going to give you the information, and you've got to make them feel comfortable. So that's probably number one. And number two, coinciding with that, is you've got to listen. You've got to let them talk. You can guide the questions, but let them tell you as much as they can about what's happening, because it's just these small little things where you're like, okay, that probably happened there, that probably happened there, and it helps build this kind of portfolio for this injury, and areas at which you can change. So I think that listening will help you dig into their pain points, and when you figure out those pain points, you might realize that Achilles problem is not just because they've got, degeneration of the tendon. It might be because deeper down, they've wanted, that they're struggling with their mental health. It's a big kind of exercise is a big kind of thing that they use to help deal with their stress, or anything to do with weight loss and things. And that's the pain point. That's where you might be able to kind of adapt to what you're doing to help them and continue to help them, like de-stress or lose weight without the running, which may have caused that issue in the first place. And and this is where you're successful, is when you really are working on the same goals as they are. So you've really kind of got to listen and try and dig into those pain points.
No, I think that's certainly it makes sense, doesn't it? It makes
Yeah.
sense as an approach, because it's like, if someone comes in and you go straight from jumping from A to B, kind of
Yeah.
like, come in, oh, got a shoulder issue, great, here's how we fix this, and you don't take the time to actually build up that rapport with someone, that trust,
Yeah.
you're going to miss things, and you're then going to potentially misdiagnose, or you're going to not be treating them in the most optimal way, or they're just not going to do it.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, how you must have so many people where you've like said, here's a list of things that I want you to go and do, and they
Yeah.
maybe get 30% of that done.
Yeah.
But if you've built that trust up with someone, the likelihood is they're probably more likely to do the things, the rehab work that's going to actually help them get back to training.
Yeah, and if they know that you understand them, if they know that you're working with them on the same issues, then it's going to be way more effective for sure. So yeah, I definitely reiterate that listening is the most important point, and then tapping into their pain points, because that's when you feel that connection with someone and you're working towards it for sure.
Do you think that that's in part carried over from your coaching as well? So
Yeah.
was that kind of a shared trait between those?
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely, I think it's made me a bit more of an all-rounder. Um, one of my things I say often is that I think you have to become a good coach and to become a good therapist as well, especially dealing with people in the gym and doing a sport, because the coaching side of it is so important as being a therapist. We did do strength and conditioning modules at university, but not much. And we have to really understand a lot of that. So yeah, I definitely learned to listen to people and figure out what works for them as well. Because you've got exposure to so many different things and so many different people, and you know that one rule does not fit with all of them. So you just learn to figure out different ways which you can kind of tap into those points really.
Is that maybe where it differs a little bit from the kind of the traditional academic route, or what you're taught in university? Because I know certainly from my experiences that you're not really taught the kind of n=1 model. You're very much told like, hit, you see this, you do this, or
Yeah,
achieve this goal. Whereas obviously in reality, everybody's different. Nobody is the average.
yeah.
So it, is that something you found through your sort of business, your career so far?
Well, yeah, they at university they teach you the structure, they teach you the theory and stuff like that. And it's kind of down to you to find your own way. For most things out there, like they say, look, if this happens, then this is probably what's happening. But there's also research to suggest that it's not happening. And it's the same with treatment modalities. So it's down to you to kind of make your own decision on things and figure out the direction that you want to go in. And that's why us therapists are so different, and it is an opinions game, really. It's about what you think is going on and probably the tweaks that you can make to try and improve them. So yeah, I mean, it's why therapists kind of really vary in terms of their treatment methods and their thought processes for sure. And like I said, I've been shaped massively by my experiences, and being involved in a CrossFit gym and dealing with all those people has definitely helped with that.
Yeah, no, certainly. It's an interesting demographic as well. I think the kind of the CrossFit community. You've got
Yeah.
some interesting characters that kind of get drawn towards CrossFit as a kind of as a
Mhm.
whole.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that makes. I mean, I know it certainly makes some interesting coaching. So I'm sure from the therapy side of it as well, it's no
Yeah.
different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, you know, it's not just CrossFit these days, is it? CrossFit is definitely like kind of died down, but it's the group class model, or it's the gym goer. They love training. They're just as keen as the rower, the cyclist, the runner as well. You've seen more enthusiasm for training in the gym over the last 10 years, what I have for sure. So yeah, and it's nice and really rewarding actually when you're kind of dealing with those sorts of people, because they're desperate to get back to their kind of training.
So have you seen that more, maybe that shift then away from kind of like the recreational athlete within a kind of a traditional sport, to those that just their kind of their only training is within the gym, um, in CrossFit class model, whatever that kind of space is? Have you seen more of that shift?
I think so. I think so. I think they're more popular these days. I think gym training in its entirety is kind of increased in popularity for sure. So I'm definitely seeing more people that want to do that as well. Especially compared to my first clinic, where I was probably seeing a lot more triathletes. I was seeing a lot more, runners, especially yeah, I was based in Newmarket, just north of Cambridge. Whereas being in Cambridge myself is, yeah, I've seen way more, a bigger population of gym goers for sure.
Do you see that real benefit in having close ties, or even obviously operating out of a gym, like in terms of the kind of holistic benefit you can add to those members?
Yeah, I mean, treating someone, you have to go in all different avenues. You have to figure out, what's their stress like, how's their sleep, what's their nutrition like, and therefore, that alongside actually trying to figure out what's wrong with their training volume, what they've done incorrectly in terms of a lift, or where they might not be bracing properly during a deadlift or something. You have to take this multi kind of faceted approach to try and fix someone's problem. And the more experience and more exposure you get to different fields, the better you become at that.
Certainly. Taking it sort of a different approach now, like thinking nuts and bolts of therapy, like what do you see as some of the key elements, and what changes from targeting kind of like early and then into late stages of rehab? Like what do you see as the process? How do you work through that process with clients?
Well, this is obviously massively individual. So you know, one size doesn't fit all, but what we try and implement here at Injury Active, we try and stay as task specific as possible. So we're going to look, I mean, what does that look like? That looks like, let's say, for example, we have a runner that comes in, they've got a knee issue. Well, what can we do to keep them running? You know, that might be managing their kind of early stages. It might be managing the acute phase of it a little bit. So it might mean that we just have to scale back completely and just keep weight bearing and doing long walks instead of the running. It also means that, you know, we're going to actually look at their running and we're going to see what we can do to improve that kind of whole kinetic chain from the foot all the way up. What joint do we see that isn't functioning right, that might have a nice carryover into their symptoms and what almost instantly feels better? I think the task specific side of it is something that we really go after. And therefore, understanding that and alongside periodization of what we should be doing when, that kind of helps bring that in as well. Because, you know, with an aggravated tendon in running, the last thing we're going to do is probably add like heavy explosive kind of jumps into that injury, because we probably think that that's at the wrong stage for that. So I think you've really got to understand the periodization side of it, when to apply what based on that healing stage. So, you know, in the late stage, that's when we can get a bit more creative. That's where we can really like get heavy, a little bit more powerful and stuff like that, because tendons obviously need to be exposed to the load of their sport, and you know, you need to make them ready for that.
Yeah, no, certainly. And I think from a kind of a prehab perspective, so either with someone who is obviously had a repeat injury, or even those that are just looking to kind of injury proof themselves, or whatever you want to term that, like it's that same thing, isn't it? It's kind of identifying these are the stresses, these are the loading, this is the forces involved in this activity, and how well can we prepare tissue. So runners is a good example of this. People who get into running and from a sort of a tendon ligament perspective probably have no business doing the level of running or the kind of the speeds and paces they're trying to push.
Yeah.
Do you do much work in that respect? Obviously you obviously work with people who are injured, but do you do the opposite side of that? Do you do the kind of the prehab stuff as well?
Prehab stuff in regards to getting people ready for surgery, not so much. But, you know, I often find that if I have people come into me with a chronic issue that is due to like just poor lifestyle and stuff like that, let's say someone with a constantly like sore lower back and they don't train, they don't exercise, they don't do any of that, I often try and push them down the path of trying to figure out a way for them to get exercising, because most people, you know, they do want to improve the health of their lifestyle and stuff, but they just don't really know how. So we have to get them ready for that. You know, once we've figured out that injury and once we've reduced the pain, it's like, okay, well, where do you want to go in terms of your exercise? What can we do? And we have to expose their body to that. So with runners, for example, a nice easy one is the Couch to 5K, because it's a nice structured, slow, progressive program that exposes the tendon to kind of gradual forces, and it allows them to adapt. So this is probably where people, like I said, get most injuries from, when their training is incorrect and they put too much too soon into it. So runners like, oh, you know what, 10 years ago I ran a 10K, I'll just go and do a 5 or a 10K. But fortunately that tendon isn't used to those forces, and that's when it reacts. So yeah, I do try and get people ready for that. And also, you know, as part of their kind of like stage of rehab, I'm going to be exposing them to like, you know, some sort of like strength work as well, which is also going to help those tendons and the muscles adapt to those forces, which will put them in, you know, a better position to kind of do some exercise.
I mean, this is a very broad question, but what and again, very context specific, what changes from an acute to a chronic injury? So say you get someone come in with an acute sports injury, they've taken a tackle badly or something in that capacity, versus someone, as you say, who's got that more chronic pain that might be due to lifestyle or their training potentially.
I mean, they normally present really differently. So if you've got a big fat swollen ankle because someone's just rolled it and it's highly painful, can barely weight bear, well, firstly we need to rule out the big things, you know, some fractures and stuff like that, and then we need to figure out how we're going to get out of this inflammatory phase really quickly. So we have to just follow the principles that we know that works. You know, like we need to protect it. We need to get them kind of like backing away from loading it to start with straight away. We need to try and control that swelling with some compression. And then we've got to figure out, you know, over the next 24 to 48 hours what we're going to be doing other than that. The next stage will be getting them to load it early as much as we can, get them to do some basic active range of motion exercises and try and get that range back as quickly as possible. That looks completely different to someone that then comes in with, I've had this shoulder pain for the last 6 months. It's keeping me up at night. I'm pretty sure that happened when I started swimming quite a lot. I can't take my arm behind my back. I can't undo my bra strap. I can't raise my arm out to the side. Well, cool. We've got to figure out what's happening there. We've got to rule out again the red flags just to make sure everything's safe to kind of kick on. And then we've got to figure out what we can do to improve that. So normally in those sorts of cases, we don't really want to protect it straight away. We want to figure out what we can do to load the area and get that stronger and desensitized. And when I say desensitized, that's just because, if they can't move their shoulders, because that nervous system is literally telling us that there's a threat there. So therefore it's causing the pain. So we've got to find ways that we can help that. And, in those early cases of, let's say, shoulder pain and it's a tendon issue, they love isometrics. Isometrics are where we get contractions that load the tendon without too much movement. And they're great painkillers for tendons. And then we get a bit more range from that. So then we get a bit more of a buy-in. Then we're trying to figure out other ways that we can try and restore that range and also get that tendon loaded without causing a big problem there. So it's a balancing act in those cases. It's like we've just got to give enough for it to respond, but not too much where we make it kind of a detrimental experience for them.
No, certainly. I suppose it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Really, that acute injury is kind of first stage is to deal with the obvious issues, be it swelling or kind of cutting someone right back to like, do not load it. And versus like you then have the chronic issue that someone that's been dealing with something for a long time, and then it's like actually you're kind of for the most part probably still functional daily life, but we need to work out like why this has happened. And like if someone gets hit by a car, it's obvious what happened. Like, yeah. But if obviously it's something chronic and it's been there for a long time, it can be I can imagine it can be a lot harder to work out like potentially what's going on.
Yeah, because like with a sprained ankle, someone just rolled it because they jumped up for a header and they landed on someone else's foot. It's probably not lifestyle factors that's caused that. It's probably just one of those freak accidents that we can then say, look, it's based on either a grade 1, grade 2, or grade 3. It's probably going to take either 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever, right? It's a lot easier basically dealing with acute issues in that sense. When we've got this chronic issue, well, what's happened? What are you doing? Everything from your lifestyle, your sleep, your stress, what's been going on here. And I've definitely found over the years that these are really, really hard to kind of estimate how long they're going to take, because you've also got the buy-in of the client as well. You've got to, how much are they going to listen to you? How much are they going to be responding in terms of their rehab themselves? And sometimes you get these people coming in with shoulder issues and I fix them very early on, and sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but it's one of those things, and you've got to set expectations. You can't promise them the world. You've got to let them know that there's going to be hiccups along the way, especially when you expose them to new things, because we don't know how it's going to react. And it's all a balancing act. We've got to just get that right. And once we have their buy-in and once they have the trust, it's generally a pretty positive experience, but you don't know which way it's going to go. Not always.
I was going to say, to that end, have you ever struggled with someone in a chronic pain situation where they've potentially gone through a few different therapists and physios, and have then sort of ended up on your kind of doorstep, if you like? How have you ever had that experience and had to sort of deal with someone who has a misplaced or just mistrust potentially of therapists as a whole?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not uncommon for people to come in for a second opinion or a third opinion, or they've been seeing people and haven't got any results. And again, that's just the nature of the beast. I'm sure people have come away from me and then gone to see other people, because you're not going to fix everything, and you're going to try and your way of fixing this issue. And sometimes the human body is a really complex structure. It's fantastic at adapting, but it's not. I'll put my hands up. I don't fix everything. It's impossible to do that, and I'll be lying and saying that I did. So they're going to, I'm going to see different people that have seen other therapists and stuff, but it's an opinions game. It's the way that they've assessed it. Maybe it hasn't worked for them. I'm going to try my way, and you've got to again just follow the principles of the way that I treat. I want to listen. I want to try and build that trust, and I want to explain to them as much as I can why it might not have worked, in my opinion, but what we're going to try differently to help with that. And I think the more honest you are with that sort of stuff, the more you can build the trust. And I think that the clients, the patients, they kind of respect that.
think that's a good point to make, and I don't think it's as black as white as just like got a problem, do this to fix it. I think you have to account for the fact that there's an interpersonal aspect to therapy, to coaching, whereby you kind of have to get along with you kind of have to not necessarily agree 100% on things. You don't even have to be like friends necessarily. It's kind of you have to be on common ground with someone that you're going to be working with in order to achieve the best results. Because say if that level of trust is not there to begin with, therapy, treating someone in any respects is a million times harder. And in all seriousness, you're probably not going to help them as much because you're just not going to get on with them potentially. And I think, call it placebo or whatever, but that has a huge, if someone doesn't trust you, that's huge implications for their ability to recover and move past
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, the trust one is a big one. They've got to have a positive experience. If they don't, it's that whole negative side that's reinforcing their already, wavering kind of judgment on you. So yeah, building that trust is massive.
Bit of a different sort of question now, but where do you see the benefits, maybe the kind of drawbacks of more active versus kind of passive strategies within a kind of rehab therapy setting?
Yeah. I mean, they both play their parts. They both have a role. But I think that the more we can kind of get people doing their own stuff, the more it kind of hands over the responsibility to them, and it's all to do with us guiding the process. What I don't want is people to come in and just expect to sit on the couch, get mobilized, get treated that way, and it's all down to us. And when's the magic going to happen? The active stuff, it's fantastic for keeping that full kinetic chain going. So for example, if you're early weight bearing through the foot, after an ankle sprain and you're getting that foot down, you're going to have, ankle moving, the knee moving, the hip, and it's obviously going to stimulate that nervous system, which can often really help versus just mobilizing one of their joints in the ankle. So, we do both, but we try and get people moving as much as we can. We try and get them doing the exercise as much as we can because, it's certainly a way more positive outcome when we involve both. I certainly used to be way more of a hands-on, just a passive sort of guy because that's what university taught us. Rest from the activity. What can we do? We can mobilize, we can massage, we can use modalities such as ultrasound or electrotherapy, and it's down to us to kind of fix that issue. Well, actually it's not. It's you've got to dive deeper into the injury and the surrounding areas of that, the subjective side of it, what's been happening, then getting them to kind of like, okay, how do we keep you squatting when you've got that painful hip? What can we do to tweak that? And then giving them exercises to do. And on the back of that, I try and keep it as simple as possible. So give them one thing to do and then they're way more likely to have a buy-in. So yeah, I think a combination of both the active and the passive stuff, but we try and gear our treatments to the area of active as much as possible.
That's an interesting point you made as well in terms of like giving someone one thing to do, because obviously I feel like, and I've certainly had experience of this in the past with kind of like therapists, physios, that I go see a physio and I get a printout of 10 plus exercises that I need to be doing, and I maybe do 2 of them. So it's kind of I suppose it's that difference between getting someone to kind of do something with real intention behind it versus just here's a load of things that probably you're not going to do anyway, and then we're going to see lackluster results off the back of that. Like, where do you, obviously you've sort of said that's kind of the approach you take, like what benefits do you see to that?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's quite easy sometimes when I'm dealing with the gym goer because, like, let's say, for example, we've got an irritated shoulder. Well, okay, they're going to the gym 4 times a week. Well, 2 of those sessions are going to be posterior chain, and we can just amend what they're doing, and then we can have, a modified upper body session where it might be like, okay, well, we can get some horizontal pulling in as well, but we're going to stay away from the painful stuff. So actually, even though they see that as their training, that's actually contributing to the rehab itself. And then I might give them one specific exercise to do. So let's say, for example, I want to see a little bit more upward rotation in that scapula on the right side. Well, I'll give them one exercise to go after that. And that hopefully will have a nice little carryover. But without them knowing, they're already doing the rehab in terms of their posterior chain stuff, their pulling work, which is going to be for the shoulder. but again, I think that one exercise done well is much better than giving them eight exercises done poorly. So I'd rather them focusing on one thing and have that buy-in. And I think when you overcomplicate things, that's when it gets overcomplicated for them, and they're way less likely to kind of be on board with what you're asking.
Which I suppose it's all comes back then to that idea of talking to them, listening, understanding everything you can in terms of like how that injury came about themselves, all the kind of the personal aspects that go into that, because that then lets you choose that one exercise that's going to affect the change in them versus giving them the very kind of shotgun approach. Here's a load of exercises, you might do some of them, you might not, kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, I guess so. And you've got to understand, your client as much as you can, and figuring out what's going to work for them. You've quickly got to figure out that actually, giving them whatever 3 exercises and it's going to end up taking them 25 minutes during the day, they're not going to do it. What can you do that's going to match their lifestyle, and help them? One of the hardest things is, when people have got lower back issues and they are sat at a desk all the time, and they have a painful back when they're sat at the desk all the time, but they still don't really want to move, because once you get tied down into work, it's really difficult. So what else can you do outside of that that's going to make them respond in a positive way? So yeah, it's all down to an individual basis, really.
So next, like in terms of, we've obviously you've brought this up in kind of a couple of different ways so far, but where do you see the role of, I'm going to call it more traditional kind of strength conditioning principles within the rehab process? Obviously, this is something that you've kind of brought up and seems like it's a huge part of what you do. Like, where do you see that role?
Well, I think that it still plays a massive role in terms of traditional rehab, but where I've learned and been exposed to kind of like the training side of it, you've got way more in your arsenal now. So at university, dealing with a patellofemoral pain, it might have been some just isolated quad work. Well, how else can we expose that knee to load, and how else can we get that quadricep group stronger? Well, understanding how to train a muscle group based on like reps, frequencies, and sets and stuff, but also what sort of movements target that quad group. It just makes you, you have way more at your disposal to kind of target that group. So I now have so many more ways to target a quad group or a knee issue than I ever did at university, just because I've been exposed to kind of more traditional ways of strength training and stuff. And it's normally to do with the accessory work. We've got big old variations in the squat. We've got the front squat, the back squat, goblet squat. We've got the single arm overhead squat. We've got overhead squat. We've got heel elevated squat. It's like understanding what exercise there is probably going to help us towards our goal. Whereas I definitely wasn't exposed to that at university, because it was just okay, we'll just go after these small, maybe just some banded knee extensions. Well, why can we not get them doing the other stuff as well? And therefore it's just going to be a little bit more functional, if you like, because their whole body's working as well. So it's just increase the arsenal I have at my hands, really. So yeah,
I suppose that comes back to always trying to move them towards being, or going back to what they were doing before. So it's kind of like the idea of like involving the entire kinetic chain in something versus isolating it. But then what instances do you see where maybe isolating a muscle, isolating a pattern, isolating a specific element, where do you see that playing in?
Oh, so there's still a role for that as well. So, let's go post ACL issue. And we've got massive atrophy to the quads group. Well, okay, let's get them squatting. Let's get them trying to load up that way. So we'll go after, some bilateral stuff, and then we'll go after some single leg stuff as well, because there's, obviously a deficit there. But then maybe let's finish off with some accessory work where we can just target that quadriceps group, where we really get isolated fatigue for that area. So that's when we might go to banded knee extension stuff. It's still a great way to build hypertrophy, muscular endurance, specifically if we're going after that one group. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. I think it's because that's where maybe because I think traditionally kind of physiotherapy is like, it is that, isn't it? It's that kind of idea of, oh cool, this is the weak area, so we're gonna isolate this area.
Yeah.
And I suppose that still has a place. I think it's kind of one of those things that as new understanding comes out, as kind of people evolve and update their practice, they can sometimes throw out the old things, and it's like, well, actually, those old things probably still have their place. You said like the massage, for example, still has its place.
yeah,
Doesn't just because you found something that's new and better for
yeah,
kind of inverting like sort of whatever there, but
yeah,
I suppose there's always a place for something, and it's understanding that these are all just tools, aren't they, to achieve a certain outcome. And it's say similar in S&C in a sort of strength conditioning perspective. People get very caught up in exercises and very caught up in like this is the best thing for this. And it's like, well, they're all just tools. They all achieve an outcome, and that outcome is very specific to obviously an individual and their kind of circumstance. So it's finding the right tool for the job and not just using a hammer because that's all you've got, kind of
yeah,
thing, I suppose, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely. The more tools you have at your disposal, the more variation you have in your treatment methods for sure. And you can get lazy. You can be like, like one thing treats all, but it's not going to work in the end. And you have to keep on top of that sort of stuff and keep trying to refine your tools, really, like, figure that sort of stuff out and keep learning. The more you have at your disposal, when you do come up against, difficult kind of injuries that aren't really, they're being a bit more problematic, well, then try something else. And then you've got, another option there, and then maybe that will work. So yeah, absolutely. Having more to play with always helps.
Mm. So thinking in terms of like from performance perspective versus more of like a general health
Mm-hmm.
perspective. So maybe you could almost say like the general population stuff versus the athletes, if you like, or people
Yeah.
who are chasing performance in some aspect in training or otherwise. Like, when do you try to fix a compensation pattern versus working around that compensation pattern?
I think when I find if I find a conversation that I think is happening, I'm always going to try and improve it because I want to figure out why that's happening. Um, for example, a compensation might be when they're going into a lunge, they end up straightening the knee first to bail out because they're probably weak through the quads, and then they end up like extending the hip a bit more. Okay, well, there's clearly a bit of a weakness there. The quads aren't able to sustain that weight and drive up there. So it might be like, you know what, I'll definitely see if we can try and improve that because the left looks way different to the right. The left one looks stable. It looks like it's comfortable. It looks like it can absorb the load and drive out quite easily. Whereas the right one drops in, it bails out. It compensates by shooting that hip up first to avoid the quads or whatever. Yeah, that's the sort of thing that I want to improve because I'm always trying to basically make things pretty symmetrical as much as possible, and to make sure that both sides and each area is able to tolerate the loads equally.
Hmm. I think it's interesting as well because when you think about that in some sports, in some performance aspects, like compensations actually improve performance, don't they? So I think like a swimmer, for example, swimmers for the most part are going to have pretty kind of extraordinary ranges of motion at their shoulder, and they're going to be sort of fairly lax in that response in that respect. Power lifters, for example, are going to have probably incredibly tight around their hips because
Yeah,
that contributes very much so to the sport. Like,
yeah,
what's that balance you see between health versus performance as a
yeah.
therapist?
And like the sprinter, they're not going to have massively flexible and mobile joints at their ankle, are they? So, do I want to change that? Probably not. No. Why would I need to? It's normally if there's a painful area that I think can improve, and if we try and improve that, the pain subsides. So that's where I'd be looking because everyone is different. I don't go off the standard model of the human body should work like this. I'm just looking at the individual, and really I'm trying to look at, does one side differ from the other, and if that one does differ, is it worse, and how do we get that one better? So majority of the time, if someone, the way they walk, the way they run, I don't really want to change that if that's the way that they are. It's just normally if there's pain involved and stuff like that. So um, yeah, and perhaps maybe I'd want to change someone that might be suffering with a achy neck, achy shoulder when they're sat at a desk all day, and I figured out that they're pretty stiff through their back, shoulder, and stuff like that. But all I really want to do there is vary movement, and as a side effect, they probably will end up being a bit more mobile in their upper back and shoulders and stuff. So that's probably going to have a nice little carryover. But the powerlifter, for example, yeah, maybe they do have tight hips, but as long as they've got the range of motion to get to that parallel level that they need to in competition, there's no need to change that. And that's obviously going to give them the tightness and the spring and the recoil to get out of that anyway. So yeah, that's probably the difference.
No, certainly, I'd agree fully with that kind of sentiment. That yeah, like when it becomes then a limiter, be it pain or otherwise, in terms of their health or their longevity within the sport, because ultimately you're trying to make athletes be able to play for years and years, not kind of like the short term
Mm,
improvements. So I suppose that's where it comes in, isn't it? Where it's like this might be something that's beneficial to your sport, but it's having negative impacts and will continue to have negative impacts and potentially like shorten your career. So I suppose it's that balance, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yep. And again, if someone's been, towards the end of their career, and they've got a certain way of moving, it's unlikely you're going to change too much there. It's a big old lifestyle change if they're going to make those big changes anyway. So it's down to them.
Mm. So thinking current affairs now, I mean, touch wood with this, I think we're just about over kind of COVID and it's starting to get back to normal. But how is this period kind of, how have you guys adapted to that? Because obviously it's led to big changes across the sports industry as a whole, but
Mm.
physiotherapy is certainly one that's had a large impact on.
I mean, the first 3 months we had to completely shut up shop. So we had to go completely virtually, which, worked for us anyway, because, we're not as hands-on as what maybe I would have been, at the start of my career, like I said. So let's say, for example, you're a new consultation and you're telling me about your shoulder issue you've had because you've just started doing a lot of burpees. Well, I'm going to figure out ways that we can keep you training, which is what you want to do. We're going to figure out why it might have occurred in the first place. So it's probably because you've ended up doing 100 burpees per day and overloaded that tendon. And then it's having a look at how you move, so we can see how you're doing, what you're doing on the screen. We can find ways where we can load that shoulder that's going to help with you kind of respond well to the injury. So it doesn't necessarily need me to get hands on and mobilize that joint or whatever. It's a symptom modification. It's the way that we modify your training. So that worked actually quite well. It wasn't easy, but it obviously did, because I think a lot of people didn't see the value in the virtual consults as well, but quite a lot of people did. So we were able to do that. And then once we opened up again, it was just a case of, it was changing all the time. You can't touch people. Yes, you can. If you try and do it this way, but okay, look, we'll do our very best. We opened the clinics and it's just basically been, okay since going, and certainly since the new year, it's just gone crazy again. People really, really value their exercise and training. So it's actually been quite a good thing that we've been able to carry on working in even during lockdown and stuff. So
Everyone in the cat got the running bug, didn't they?
oh, we saw a lot of that for sure, and that's one of the things that we were trying to get out, is like, look, just be slow with it and be progressive. But obviously, we saw a lot of that and tendon issues certainly because of that. So, yeah, I mean, it feels like we're out of it now, or getting out of it, and certainly with everyone going back to the gym, back to their training, I'm in my work environment here and it's pretty full on. It feels very normal. So yeah, it feels like we're out of it, which is a good thing. But been somewhat normal for a while now.
I think this is going to spell any changes for either yourself and Injury Active or the industry as a whole going forward?
For those people that just treat hands-on, that would have been a really, really tough existence for them in the first 3 months. They would have completely struggled to do anything. Hopefully that will then encourage them to learn a little bit more about, managing people, their training loads, understanding a bit more about training and the fact that you can help people that way. So people perhaps in that group might. And, previous to lockdown anyway, I did have an option for virtual appointments anyway, because I was getting requests from the US and, around the world. So it was not huge. That sounds, like we were just inundated with lots of appointments from around the world, but it was the occasional one. So I was like, oh, why not? I can help people online. I can see what's going on. So that was always an option there. It's something that we'll carry on as a group, as a company. It's not as obviously popular as the in-person ones, but it's definitely something that we're going to carry on and offering that. And then we launched our kind of performance program a little bit more in during lockdown as well. So I realized that actually this came on the back of dealing with a client that really wasn't, she had a chronic neck C-spine issue. And I felt like, I just needed to get her moving a bit more, which would often improve that sort of situation. And she'd come in for treatment, then she wouldn't do anything for 2 weeks. Then I'd see her again and we wouldn't get much progress. So I ended up saying to her, look, I want you to follow this program. I'm going to program for you 5 days a week. And it allowed me to do some pulling work, some opening, closing of the, T-spine and stuff like that. And she was on just a kind of a monthly thing with me, and results were huge. So all of her neck pain disappeared. She was compliant. She's actually now exercising. She's doing like, rounds of 500-meter on the rower. She's going for kind of long distance walks. She's doing strength work. And that's something then that I've kind of pushed on a little bit more with Injury Active. So we have, a certain amount of people that are doing that as well. And one of them is coming back from complete chronic pain, where she's from the age of like 16, and she's now in her 30s. She hasn't been able to walk for more than half an hour. She's now running 10K, which is amazing, and that's based on that program as well. And it's obviously an individual program. I've obviously got the C-spine client that's doing well. I've got someone and two people that are, after a little bit more performance based. So they want, one wants a bit more aesthetics, and one is on it because, she just wants to improve the way that she looks, her performance and her strength numbers. And, she actually came to see me with a back issue. So I'm able to kind of manage both. So I'm able to manage, what she's doing in her training. I'm full on, programming for that, and keeping her safe. So even though she's got an injury, we're able to train and make progress. And now the injury's gone, we're able to push on even more. So that sort of stuff, I'll be pushing more even so. So
do you see that starting to filter in the industry as a whole, kind of that like almost one-stop shop type approach where you almost have all these different elements under one roof to truly offer a holistic service to a client?
Yeah, there's loads of ways that you can go down into this, and with Injury Active, we're hoping to kind of expand that for sure in the future. We are looking at other ways that we can help people and get their kind of training involved in kind of Injury Active side of it as well, rather than just being a centre for people to come and get their injuries fixed. There's so much more variation that we can kind of tap into here and offer our expertise to help people. And obviously my experience of having a gym for 7 years, and a group class gym, that's definitely going to kind of like come into play.
I think it's the only thing that makes sense, like long term within the kind of the private sector of health and performance. Like it's the only thing that makes sense to have that shift towards. And it doesn't just have to be an individual that can do everything. As you say, it could be like yourselves, where you have a business structure built up to be able to facilitate that kind of ability to offer people more than just come here and get your injury fixed.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I opened the gym, and then I had the sports injury clinic, Injury Active, upstairs, and it was like, people just like jokingly with me saying that, it's a trap. We're creating the business for ourselves, get people injured and then put them up there. But it's just part and parcel of exercise. Any sport, there's always a risk. You always got problems. It's never going to be completely risk-free where you're not going to pick up injuries. So create this center where people can work on what they love, improve their fitness, manage their stress, train, and all sorts. And then if they do pick up injuries, if they do want kind of areas or help to improve the way that they move and get better with the movement, we're there on site as well to help with that. So it's this kind of like multi kind of faceted approach to people's exercise, which I think works really well.
Off the back of that, what's the 5-year plan for Injury Active? Where do you want to kind of move it to?
I mean, yeah, we unfortunately, like, I haven't, in January we had to close down the gym because of the whole COVID situation. It just didn't, work out, and realized it was going to be such a long way back to recover from. But that then allowed me to kind of put way more energy back into Injury Active, and it's had a lovely positive response on that. So we've definitely, probably in the 1 year of being in COVID, probably improved by about 3 years in terms of everything from our brand to our marketing and stuff. So then at the moment, we're just trying to consolidate. We're just trying to catch our breath. We pulled through this hard time, with all clinics still there, and we're busier than ever in certainly 2 of the clinics. The next stage for us, look, maybe it is something that combines both the gym and the clinic side of things. We haven't quite, committed to anything yet, but I'm at the drawing board. I've got a weekend planned away with actually one of my best friends who also own a business. We're going to go away for a weekend just along the coast and just literally have a weekend of just brainstorming, spending a day on his business and spending a day on my business. And, that getting those ideas out and trying to figure stuff out, helps a lot.
Was it the Bill Gates approach, isn't it? Just lock yourself in a hotel room or whatever for.
Oh, he reads it all, weekend and so forth. But I'll be doing less of that and more just brainstorming, lots of coffee, lots of kind of just ideas floating around, what works, what doesn't, and just a bit of research that way.
Which I think it's interesting. I think it's one of those things that And I'm a big believer of this personally, that if you're not trying to innovate, if you're not trying to move forward, then you're just stagnating. And I could think of nothing worse, sort of personally, professionally, as a business owner yourself. Like, you kind of have to be looking to evolve, I suppose. And COVID maybe been a catalyst for that. I think it's been a catalyst for a lot of people, because it's suddenly lots of people within the industry had a hell of a lot of free time on their hands, and it's given them the opportunity to, like, similar to yourselves, like, expand, think what's actually okay. How can we get better? How can we move forward with this,
Yeah,
and actually build something off the back of this, rather than kind of like, cool, can we just try and get back to where we were? It's
yeah,
like, actually, how can we take 5 steps beyond that? Which is
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'm always looking to kind of see what else we can do and improve the service that we offer. And yeah, we'll see what the future holds. And maybe 2021 and stuff will be exciting for us.
yeah, definitely. So last thing then, like, where can people find you? Where can people find Injury Active?
Yeah, we probably, our website, we've had a bit of a revamp over the last year, injuryactive.com. We have like some resources pages there for runners, for back pain sufferers and stuff like that. You can get to find out a little bit more about our team and also book online. But all of our kind of, videos that we put up, our content is all on our social media page. So we mainly chuck out so much on Instagram. So you can find us at Injury Active. And that's where we're at.
Cool. I'll get all that linked down in the show notes. Whereabouts? So sorry, if you could, whereabouts are you actually based in terms of like the clinics, if people are interested?
Yeah, we've got Central Cambridge, so we're on Station Road inside of WeWork. We've got a clinic inside of there. We're also in South Cambridge, so in Sawston, which is only 10 minutes away. And then further down, we're in Saffron Walden inside of a gym called Just Gym. And then further down the M11, Bishop's Stortford inside of a gym called The Rig. So that's where you can find us.
And I have personally experienced, obviously, your services, and been at sort of the hands of your guys, and yeah, been probably best like therapy type service I've ever had, in terms of like just the level of service. And then they say, like, the holistic package of it. It's not just a case of like going in and getting massage, and
Yeah,
you kind of find yourself 6 months down the line not really any further along the rehab process. So yeah,
yeah,
if anybody is injured, like, it's probably one of the better places to go and check out.
yeah. Good to hear, mate. Good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for making some time today. It's been cool to chat.
Yeah, mate. Likewise, and thanks for having me.
No worries.